Without objection. So I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Without objection.
Thanks. With that, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to yield to my friend, the gentleman from Maryland, the House Majority Leader.
I thank the Republican whip for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. and will recess shortly thereafter. At approximately 11 a.m., the House will meet in joint session with His Excellency Mr. Takiosis, the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, Greece. Votes are expected in the House on Tuesday thereafter. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. The House will consider Chairman Scott's H.R. 7309, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act of 2022, which is an important part of the Make It in America agenda. Now more than ever, business needed skilled workers, and it is essential that we reauthorize WIOA to expand access to skills training for high-demand, high-wage jobs. Mr. Speaker, the House will also consider H.R. 7688, the Consumer Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act, introduced by Representatives Kim Schreier and Katie Porter. This critical legislation seeks to give the Federal Trade Commission greater authority to rein in excessive gas prices. This bill would protect consumers against irresponsible actors in oil and gas who would artificially inflate prices for extra profit, and it will help Americans struggling with higher energy costs. Mr. Speaker, the House will also consider two bills under suspension of the rules in recognition of National Police Week. Mr. Speaker, 23,229 of our fellow citizens have lost their lives over the course of the existence of our country in law enforcement and doing their duties in protecting us and protecting our property. The first of those bills is H.R. 6943, the Public Safety Officer Support Act, bipartisan legislation that would expand eligibility for the Public Safety Officers Benefit Program to include stress and trauma-related injuries and death by suicide for law enforcement officers and their families. Tragically, Mr. Speaker, that happens too often as a result of the trauma and stress which our police officers around the country confront. The second bill is H.R. 2992, the TBI and PTSD Law Enforcement Training Act. Bipartisan legislation, Mr. Speaker, that would require the Department of Justice to develop crisis intervention training tools for law enforcement agencies so they can better equip officers to respond to individuals with traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder, some of the most dangerous confrontations that our officers have. The House will also consider, Mr. Speaker, H.R. 6531, the Targeting Resources to Communities in Need Act of 2022, sponsored by Jim Clyburn and Hal Rogers, the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee. Unfortunately, that failed on suspension, so it's coming back under rule. We will also consider S. 2938, legislation to designate the United States Courthouse and Federal Building located at 111 North Adams Street in Tallahassee, Florida, as the Joseph Woodrow Hatchett United States Courthouse and Federal Building, which was sponsored by Senator Mark Rubio, Republican member of the United States Senate. The House will consider other bills under suspension of the rules. The complete list of suspensions will be announced by the close of business today. In addition, Mr. Speaker, we obviously will be ready at any time that the Senate can pass assistance to the extraordinary, brave, and courageous Ukrainians who are confronting the Russian criminal invasion of their country, unprovoked, unwarranted, and unjustified. So that we will have that legislation as soon as it comes back here, considered hopefully on this floor so that we can get the some $40 billion in military and humanitarian assistance that is needed in Ukraine so critically. It is a sad thing that we passed this bill Tuesday night, and it's been sitting in the Senate with essentially now one senator, one Republican senator, Mr. Paul of Kentucky, holding it up. And I'm hopeful that the Senate can move it over to us quickly. And we passed it in overwhelming bipartisan fashion when it was here. So that is also a possibility, Mr. Speaker, to be on the floor next week. And I yield back to the distinguished whip.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And, as we look at some of the bills that will be brought up next week, in the price gouging bill, there are some number of concerns with the way it's not really defined in terms of what price gouging would even be. But as we know, the current state of our energy crisis is really because we, through the Biden administration, have shut down energy production in America. In fact, just the other day, President Biden, earlier this week, in the midst of dramatically high gas prices, President Biden announced that he's canceling massive oil and gas lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico, where there are rich reserves of American energy that could be produced, in Alaska, where there are rich reserves of American energy that could be produced. President Biden said no yet again, and this isn't the first time. In fact, since he became president, on day one, Joe Biden started attacking American energy, killed not only the Keystone, but the ability to produce and make any new pipelines in America to move energy around our country so that we don't have to import it from countries like Russia, which President Biden made us dependent on Russian oil. In fact, was begging Putin to send us more oil while he's canceling the ability for us to produce our own energy. You've seen other steps that the president's taken all throughout his presidency to make it almost impossible to produce American energy, to move American energy, to export American energy. LNG permits that are sitting on the desk waiting to be signed for over a year, not a single new LNG export permit to help not just America lower our energy prices, but to help our friends around the world, especially in Europe, not need to get energy from bad actors like Putin. And as Putin is hopefully going to be pushed to the side in terms of energy that we get, the president continues to turn not to American energy, but to turn to other dictators, to go to Iran, to go to Venezuela, while shutting down American energy. And so we have a bill, and I brought this up to the majority leader a number of times, H.R. 6858, over 130 co-sponsors, a bill that would actually open up American energy so we can lower gas prices. We can actually do something about it, not try to point the finger and blame this person. The president tried blaming Putin. Nobody in the country bought it because they knew gas prices were going up dramatically well before Putin invaded Ukraine. In fact, President Biden, by shutting down American energy, allowed Putin to make $700 million a day selling his oil to America and Europe, $700 million a day leading up to the war to help fund the war against Ukraine, because President Biden said no to American energy over and over again. This bill would actually fix that. Now, when you look at the price gouging bill, first of all, Senator Granholm, the Secretary of Energy, was asked in a committee hearing recently, just about 2 weeks ago, if there was price gouging. She said, quote, "I'm not sure anyone is saying there is wholesale gouging." Now, if you read the bill, what we've seen of it so far doesn't allow the FTC to take action against the President of the United States, who actually is responsible for the gouging prices, high prices, whatever you want to define gouging as. Again, the bill itself is very vague. If you just don't like a high price, you can go blame somebody else, or we could actually do something about it. We'd actually bring a bill like H.R. 6858 that would actually allow us to open up American energy that's here, great technology, lowest carbon emissions in the world, by the way, as we're now forced to rely on energy from other countries who actually emit more carbon to produce their oil. We produce lower oil. And I would yield, especially if the gentleman would tell me we're bringing this up on the floor. I'd be happy to yield right now.
The gentleman mentioned this the last time we had a colloquy and pointed out that the drilling and processing of petroleum products are the cleanest in the world. You made that point last week, and you've just made it now. Does the gentleman know why that is the case?
Gentleman yields.
I will yield.
Because America has the best standards in the world.
Correct.
America knows how to do it better. And by the way, it's American innovation that has opened up the ability to produce more energy cleaner than anyone else in the world. And the President of the United States is the one saying no to America. He's not saying no to all energy. He's saying no to the cleanest American energy, but then he's begging foreign countries who actually produce energy without American standards, begging them to give us our oil at a much higher price than just doing it here in the best place to do it in the world. It perplexes me why the President of the United States says no to American energy while begging dictators to give us our energy at a higher cost, but that's where we are, and I would yield.
Gentleman,
Yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, we've had this discussion before. I'm going to take a little bit of time to, because if you just listen to the Republican whip, you would think that America is bereft of production of oil or of LNG or of petroleum-based products. I want to go through what America is doing and what the increase has been and what can be done. First of all, the United States is the largest producer of oil in the world. 18.61 million barrels per day. Saudi Arabia is about half of that at 10.8. Russia is slightly less than Saudi Arabia. Canada, about half of what Russia is doing. China, about half, a little less than half of what Russia is doing. So we are the largest producer of petroleum products. We import some. That is largely based on the type of petroleum products that we use. On crude oil, we're producing 11.6 million barrels in February 2022. The all-time high was 12.9, almost 13 million barrels. When Trump took office, we were producing 8.8 billion barrels in January 2017. In 2008, we were producing 5 million barrels. We've more than doubled that in a decade from that 5 billion. Oil production is up. Oil production is up more than 700,000 billion barrels from January to December 2021. It's up, very substantially up. Oil production projected to grow more than 1 million barrels this year alone. U.S. rig count, and this is important because this is the rigs that are in operation. U.S. rig count is at a current level of 705, up 7 from a week ago and up 257 from 1 year ago, 57% increase. So the presentation that somehow we're handcuffed in producing petroleum products is simply not true. In terms of natural gas, the United States is also the largest producer of natural gas in the world at 3.109 billion cubic feet. Russia's second, Iran's third, China's fourth, and Qatar is fifth. In December of 2011, Mr. Speaker, the U.S. was producing 82.1 billion cubic feet of natural gas. That was in 2011. In December 2021, we are now producing 118 billion cubic feet, a 45% increase in 10 years. So again, to hear the whip talking about it, it would be as if we have somewhat constrained and not doing our job. Now, I happen to have an export company in my district. Calvert Cliffs is a nuclear facility, but right south of Calvert Cliffs is an export facility for LNG. Cove Point, Maryland, in October 2021, 66% of the deliveries went to Asia, 34% went to Europe. In February and March of this year, it's now 80% to Europe and 20% to Asia. Why is that? So that we can meet the cutoff that is either happened because Russia did it, or it's happened because the Europeans have stopped buying, in some respects, Russian product. In any event, at the end of 2021, the U.S. had a peak export capacity of 11.6 billion cubic feet per day. By the end of 2022, that figure is expected to increase by 20%. This is not a country that is locking down the production of oil. In addition, let me point out that there are, I want to get the right figure, oil and gas companies already have 26 million acres of public lands to drill on and over 11 million acres of federal waters that are currently at their disposal. 37 million acres in total. Nothing is stopping these companies from drilling there if they choose to do so. The industry, Mr. Speaker, holds 9,000 unused, approved permits right now. 9,000 approved permits to drill, which they're not using. Last fall, the Biden administration put 80 million acres in the Gulf of Mexico for auction. Unfortunately, the court overturned that, but and there has not been pursuit of that, as the whip will point out, since that time. But the point is that the response to that offer got a 2% response for 1.7 million acres out of 80 million acres that was offered. Now, the reason I took some time to go through these figures, nobody ought to be confused by the fact that what we're experiencing is a cause of the President's proper view on we need to move to alternative fuels, proper view that we need to, as the whip has pointed out, have safe production, safe processing, energy efficient, but also environmentally sensitive production of our oil products, all of which we're doing. And I want to make it very clear that my personal view is we need to make sure that Europe has product, period, for national security reasons, as well as the whip points out, Mr. Speaker, for environmental reasons. But there ought to be no confusion that oil production in this country is doing very, very well. Now, why do some companies say they're not producing a lot? Because they're making a lot of money, a lot of profits, and buying back stock. That enhances the value of that stock, enhances the value of the company, and enhances the value of being a CEO. I don't criticize them for that, but very frankly, we're at war. A dictator has invaded, without justification, a friendly country, the Ukraine. And they have fought back with extraordinary valor. And what we really ought to do is to talk together about how we can make sure that, A, we bring gas prices down. Now, whether the FTC decides, as the gentleman's pointed out, Mr. Speaker, that whether or not there is gouging, if they don't decide that, then as Secretary Granholm observed, they're not sure. That so be it. But if they are gouging, if they are incorrectly charging consumers a higher price just because they can, then we ought to know about that. And that's what this bill that's going to be discussed next week. But there ought to be no confusion. We are producing a lot of oil. We're producing a lot of LNG. And we are trying to provide for our own needs and the needs of those who are confronting tyranny in Europe and are confronting shortages in Europe, which is driving up prices. And for the gentleman to say that these are Biden prices is simply not the case. Biden didn't have anything to do with these prices. We were producing more petroleum products. But what happened is the cartels, which have done so, and I'm old enough to remember what happened in the early 70s, the cartels are controlling supply. And as a result of the shortness of supply and the increase in demand, why? Because we dealt with the pandemic. We got shots in arms. And once we got shots in arms and we're not wearing masks on the floor anymore, we're in better shape health-wise. So what people doing? They're going out and driving. So demand is up and supply is being kept down by the cartels, not by Joe Biden. And this evidence of the companies not producing more product, and I get it. They're getting very high prices. Why should they produce more product there? Because you produce more product if you want to sell more product to make more money. But they're making a lot of money right now, and they're buying stock back. Their dividends are being paid at a healthy rate, and so here we are. So I tell the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, that we are going to deal with both the supply side, which is important, but I also want to make sure that we aren't gouging consumers in the process. I yield.
Thank the gentleman. To say that Joe Biden is not the reason that supply is limited, it just doesn't match with the facts. Again, just 2 days ago, Joe Biden, not Putin, not the big oil companies, Joe Biden canceled oil and lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico. Joe Biden canceled lease sales in Alaska. Joe Biden as a candidate. This isn't just some new development for Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a candidate for president of the United States, said, and I quote, "No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period, ends." That was Joe Biden as a candidate, and he didn't stop there. When he became president, day one, he started an attack on American energy. It's crystal clear why. Now, glad the gentleman is bragging about high production levels, but let's not think for a minute that Joe Biden's the reason that we have production today, because if you understand the oil and gas industry, I was just on a rig in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico 2 weeks ago, one of the largest producing rigs in the Gulf. Do you know that rig got its first lease in 2002, and it took about 10 years to get the first oil? Now, they put private money, all private money, over $10 billion of private money into developing those leases, and there were many leases and permits along the way to finally get to the point where they could actually bring oil out of the ground, making money to pay back the $10+ billion, but to ultimately get to a point where they could produce over 130,000 barrels today. If Joe Biden wants to try to dare take credit for that 130,000 barrels today, he needs to go check the record at how long it took to get that oil from lease, permits, out of the ground to ultimately getting it into world markets, not American markets. Oil companies don't set the price of oil, it's world markets. But that oil ultimately depletes, which is why the oil companies are always looking for new opportunities. Gentleman talks, as the White House has talked about, thousands of permits that are out there. Sounds really good. Understandably, I think people recognize it's a misleading number because many of those permits are for wells that were tried where there's no oil. Not everywhere is oil. And so you buy leases to go explore. It's called exploration for a reason. If it was known reserves, if you go drill right under a gas tank, you'll find oil. But if you want to find oil out amongst the natural resources that leases are issued for, you do test wells, you do seismic engineering. By the way, that takes years to ultimately go through the process of permitting. Since Joe Biden's been president, they've not issued new leases for seismic. So you might have a 3-mile by 3-mile lease in the Gulf of Mexico that you paid millions of dollars to the federal government 4 years ago, and you're continuing to try to explore that 3 miles by 3 miles that the federal government was happy to take the money for, but you can't even get a permit from the federal government today to explore that lease. To exercise other permits, you had to get permits for the pipelines. Not a single new pipeline permit has been issued. So even if you get it out of the ground, the Biden administration doesn't want you to have the ability to move it through to refineries, to world markets. So what you see is a recognition by the rest of the world that America's taken itself off the shelf in terms of the ability to produce energy. Again, Joe Biden is the one who canceled all these sales. Joe Biden is the one as a candidate who said there will be no drilling. And so cartels love this policy because they know now they control the supply. America is producing oil today based on permits and actions that were taken years ago. But what we're seeing today is an inability to continue developing those leases, which means ultimately they will dry up as all of those leases do, but that's why you're always exploring for the next round of fines. Those next rounds of fines aren't being explored for in America. They are being explored for in other countries, but it's countries that are cartels, countries that are monopolies, so they can control the price. Interesting, the gentleman brought up the last time we saw these kind of prices was in the 70s under a similar Democrat president who had the same kind of attitude towards American energy, and so it made our country dependent on foreign energy. It created lines at the pump where people had to wait days to get gasoline. When you saw President Trump opening up American energy and allowing a free market to produce energy, we don't put those constraints in place when we're operating under a free market, so the cartels have no leverage. Putin has no leverage. The only reason he has leverage is if you have a president like Joe Biden who says we're not going to produce in America. He said it. He took the actions to follow up on it, including just a few days ago. Amidst high gas prices, he actually took more American energy off the market, giving the cartels more monopoly power to raise prices. So I wish we would address that. We have a bill to address that and reverse those bad policies. Unfortunately, I haven't heard the gentleman commit to bring those to the floor yet, but I would yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that at a time of war that we spend all the time blaming our own president. It is unfortunate that when the Europeans put themselves over the objections of numerous administrations, in a place where they had dependence on Russia. Russia has no leverage over us. We don't need Russia for energy. As a matter of fact, we voted overwhelmingly stop buying any petroleum products from Russia, which I supported strongly. And on this side of the aisle and that side of the aisle, we supported that strongly. The fact of the matter is the gentleman refuses to recognize 80 million acres. Now, it was overturned by the courts later. 80 million acres. He says all these people want to produce and they want to look to new places and they want to find oil someplace. 2% response. 1.7 million acres out of 80 million acres were bid on. That doesn't sound to me like a stampede to find. But let me tell you what he doesn't tell the American people, Mr. Speaker, when he's making that presentation. And you would think that the Biden administration has clamped things down. The Biden administration approved more drilling permits in 2021 than the Trump administration approved in the first 3 years they were in office. Let me say that again. The Biden administration approved more permits in the first year of their term than the Trump administration did in the first 3 years of their term. So when he says, oh, the Biden administration is shutting it down, and that's why we have the problem because Russia, second, third producer of petroleum products in the world, is an irresponsible dictatorship run by one man, essentially, who wants to use petroleum products as leverage. And he had leverage on the Europeans. He had leverage, certainly, on the Ukrainians. They used energy as a bludgeon. And in addition to that, the oil companies making huge profits as these prices kept going up. So they didn't go out and do a lot of drilling. They didn't bid on a lot of new opportunities that maybe they could have, produced oil on. They didn't bother. Why? Because they were making so much money. Now, I'm not one that wants to, that's a business judgment. But the effect of not doing it meant that we had, as demand went up, a lesser of a supply, not just from their actions, but from the actions of the Saudis and others in the cartel. Again, 3 times as many permits were authorized in the first year of the Biden administration than 3 years in the Trump administration. So don't tell me that Donald Trump and the free market is one reason why this is happening. I'm for the free market because sound business judgments were, we're making a lot of money, with that money, we're going to buy back stocks. It'll make the remaining stocks more valuable. We're going to pay good dividends. Our stock values are going to go up, and everybody's happy, except the consumer, of course, who, because supply on the world markets, and it's a world market price, it's not Biden's price, it's a world market price, have gone up because demand is up and supply is down. So I don't know how the gentleman rationalizes his comments about Biden constricting petroleum production when the permits issued are 3 times, or said a different way, in 1 year, 3 times the number of permits that Mr. Trump issued in the first 3 years of his term. So I wish we'd get off this and really focus on the enemy. I know there's a lot of politics here, but we're at war. We need to produce energy. As I told you, Cove Point is now sending 80%, reversing Asia supply to European supply because they need it because we're at war. And we're up in almost every category of production of petroleum products. So we can go on and on and on about this. Rig counts that are producing oil are up 57%. 57%. From a year ago, 57% increase in operating rigs. That doesn't sound to me like Biden's shutting people down. Biden does want a clean environment. Biden does want us to look at alternative energy. That's what he was talking about in the campaign, that he wanted to look to that. But President Biden has made it very clear he understands in the short term. Short term could be 25 years or 5 years. In the short term, but particularly during the course of this war, we need to have petroleum products, and we need to have them for ourselves and for our allies. I yield back.
Well, we'll continue this discussion. I would like to see us bring up the bill that would actually address it. We'll see this debate go on next week and beyond. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Louisiana yields back. Request for 1-minute speeches. Gentlemen from Ohio seek recognition.
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As spring moves into full bloom,